And Tristan, we look at your own career path. You started as a trader, an energy trader, Lehman Brothers, JP Morgan. You've been at Twitter. You've then been into Silicon Valley, the heart of Silicon Valley. Your phone now ringing off the hook when it comes to board seats. Talk to us about these sorts of positions, and are we starting to see real change here?
I'd like to hope so. The one thing, when I think about Foot Locker and Shake Shack, I'm incredibly blessed to have the opportunity, not only as a black man, but a young black man, kind of with the experience that I have. My diversity cuts a multitude of ways. And I'm so blessed to partner with an organization or two organizations that really do believe that. Kind of in the previous segment, you kind of heard from the Goldman CEO, we can't do it ourselves. I think that there are kind of organizations that have influence to push this initiative forward. And it's a rising tide lifts all boats opportunity. And I'm excited to see some of the momentum that we've been seeing recently, particularly as it relates to board diversity.
And Tristan, you can't do it alone. And of course, you are on other boards as well. But at least in this talks with Shake Shack, is this a good, right step, even though it may not feel like enough?
Absolutely. I mean, when I think about my own career progression, I've tried to focus on really three things that matter fairly consistently. First, really the impact of the demographic shift happening in this country. Folks of color are not only the majority of the world, but will be the majority of this country in 20 to 30 years. And when we consider their cultural influence and impact, organizations really do need to respect that. Secondly, I think about brands being a force for good in the world, serving this kind of growing consumer. And then lastly, the influence of technology, not only on these businesses, but also this consumer as well. And when I think about the corporations of the future, the ones that will lead us into the future, it are the ones who are going to really be embracing those three things in its fullest extent. And folks like Foot Locker, Shake Shack, Procter & Gamble, where I am, and Walker & Company are really leading the way in that regard.
So when we talk about those companies, Tristan, I mean, these are largely companies so far that cater primarily to either a black consumer or at least a non-white consumer. There's been a pathway for success there. When you look at other entrepreneurs your age or below who are coming up with ideas, is the pathway primarily limited to catering to a black or non-white consumer, or is there maybe a broader opportunity there for some of these founders to do something that everyone will embrace?
Frankly, it is the opportunity, right? When I started Walker & Company, the first thing that folks would ask is, how niche is this opportunity? And when I'd say folks of color, the majority of the world, and will be the majority of this country in 20, 30 years, eyes get wide. And something is foundational and fundamental in having that understanding, not only kind of the size of kind of consumer audience, but also this is the most culturally influential demographic group on the planet. If you are serving consumers, you need to respect their needs in a way that they deserve to be served. And as I said earlier, the corporations of the future, whether you are an existing Fortune 500 today or a burgeoning founder, this is the opportunity you need to be focusing on. Because if you're not focusing on the majority of the world, to whom are you focusing?
Tristan, we've said it time and again, the statistics aren't good enough. We've got but 4 people of color in terms of leading Fortune 500 businesses. The C-suite is not full enough, neither are boards. But when I sort of jovially say that your phone must be ringing off the hook, it's an issue because you have such a great set of backgrounds. Of course, not only were entrepreneur in residence Andreessen Horowitz, you have been a CEO of a business, you're a board member. How do companies look to expand the pool of people they're calling and make the leap that perhaps they don't need to have served on a board before? They don't need to have been a CEO of such a stellar company such as Walker & Company, but they still have expertise, diverse viewpoints that they can bring to the table and be the right fit for that particular board or that particular C-suite.
I'm so glad you asked that question. It's the first time I've ever been asked it, and I've been waiting for somebody to ask that question because this is really an important nuance. I have to respect and acknowledge my own privilege. Certainly I grew up, with difficulty, right? Kind of in the environment that I did, but I've had the good fortune to go to a boarding school on full scholarship. I graduated from Stanford Graduate School of Business. I've had wonderful opportunities at places like Andreessen Horowitz. I've raised money for my own company, and now I sit on these boards. I am not the only one, right? And I do my damnedest to tell a lot of these organizations that I am not. And I think it is my duty in some of the roles that I have, whether it be on these board seats or in times like this where I can articulate what the full need is to not only express that privilege, but to show that there are other folks out there that deserve these same opportunities. I am incredibly blessed to have these opportunities. I've been fortunate to align myself thematically with brands that kind of fit with the values that I do have, and it does kind of look outsized. But now it's my time, and I've been consistently trying to do this over the past decade as I've articulated this push towards kind of more diversity in boards and corporations to do the work, right? And other corporations with me need to do the work in the same way that folks like Foot Locker and Shake Shack have done. So I'm very glad that you asked that question, because it is so important that I not be the only call.
So, well, Tristan, then I want to touch on then some of your, I guess, part of your childhood. I once saw an interview with you where you talked about going to Hotchkiss, which, for those folks who don't know, it's a pretty prestigious school here in New York area. And you talked about how that was the first time you really got to see how the other half lived. And you came from a neighborhood where you didn't have a lot of prosperity, but you got to see that going to school with those kids of privilege. So for those folks who maybe aren't born into wealth, aren't born into a stable environment, how do they get a chance to see that how the other half lives so they can then make decisions for themselves that are maybe a little bit more productive?
That's a great question. I think you don't have to see how the other half lived. You have to believe in yourself. You know, it took me 30 years to recognize that I only needed to do the things that were in line with my own personal values. Every single decision that I make, every single thing that I do is in line with 6 values that I have and my company does: courage, inspiration, respect, judgment, wellness, loyalty. It was really critical for me to define those things, right? So when I'm looking at things like Shake Shack, when I'm looking at things like Foot Locker, when I'm looking at starting a company like Walker & Company, I'm able to do the thing that I feel is not only meaningful for the world, but meaningful for me. And the only thing that I think my experience at that boarding school taught me was that wealth exists, right? That was something that I just had no perspective on. And when I got to understand the importance of name and last name, it just encouraged me to have a name that matters for my sons too. But I'm going to teach them everything that I've learned for myself about values, and hopefully much earlier than for them than I had to wait for myself.
Yeah.
Tristan, we've had the good fortune to speak with some wonderful founders of color on this program. We've spoken to luxury designers such as Carly Kushney, other tech entrepreneurs such as Jessica Matthews, such as James Norman. All of them have said how much harder it was for them to prove to venture funds, to people with the money, that they're worthy of that ticket, of that they had to prove revenue more than perhaps a white co-founder might have done. How are you finding Silicon Valley responding to this moment and venture capital responding to this moment?
I think there's inevitability to it. You know, if you believe that as a venture capitalist investor, you want to invest in someone who has a blue ocean opportunity, right? Focused on a consumer that is willing to engage with brands that matter. This is a consumer. Right? It's unfortunate that it's taken issues of the past few weeks to really open the eyes of a broader audience. And, you know, this is not new. You know, I've been on interviews with Bloomberg for the past decade, very thankfully. And it's kind of a wonderful platform to do it. We were talking about the same things 10 years ago. And it's my hope that it changes now, but we can't wait for that change. So when I think about, you know, not waiting for the other half, right, who lived in an experience that you did not, understanding the values that you have for yourself and creating impact, the time for us is now, and we can't wait for them to catch up with what we know already to be true, that our impact matters.
So, Tristan, about your company, Walker Company, the company that most people know you for, obviously the Bevel brand of blades most men know you for. Of course, you are now under the umbrella of P&G, and I'm wondering, when you decided to sort of make this switch, where you sort of put your company under the umbrella of a larger conglomerate like that, did you have any reservations about the idea that maybe instead of being independent and going along and building your business as sort of a, I guess, solo Black-owned company, that there would maybe limit your opportunities or would sort of steer the opportunities that you have in a way that maybe you didn't envision?
That's a great question. I mean, as a part of the deal, you know, we needed to maintain our autonomy. right? So I am still the CEO of Walker and Company. I don't have a Procter & Gamble email address, right? And it was a conversation that I think they believed in too. It was important that our consumers, our people, knew that we were going to maintain our own authenticity. And Procter & Gamble wanted to set Walker and Company up in a way that it could still exist 150 years from now. So we work diligently to ensure our own autonomy while leveraging kind of what has made Procter & Gamble great over the past 180 years: research and development, right? Go-to-market, distribution. And we have found those synergies in a big way. We are in 15 times the number of doors that we were in 18 months ago.
Yeah.
We've launched 2 times the amount of products that we did versus 18 months ago. So I think we figured out the formula. I didn't have much reservation because I knew I found the company that kind of had a value set that matched.